that because oh, thanks for recording. Yeah, thanks. The main use of revelation in church liturgical life is the many verses that are of hymns that are happening in heaven while things are going on, like "Holy, Holy, Holy" is a very famous hymn. The Battle Hymn of the Republic is actually from the Book of Revelation. The idea of having visions up in the heavens and what they're seeing. And then of course there's the Hallelujah chorus from the Messiah, which is actually text from the Book of Revelation. So I would say that, and that's the first thing we talked about in our class, was just sharing some of the hymns, because people are like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that that horrible, weird book actually has inspired some fantastic music. That's totally embraceable. So anyway, I would say that is my answer, Rabbi David.
Okay, so I'll say from my point of view, coming from the Hebrew Bible, and those of you that studied Daniel that we studied Daniel together in the summer and fall this last year, we know there's a lot of connections between Revelation and the book of Daniel. We spent an entire hour on that once, as is Revelation and Ezekiel and other prophets. And in that way, as I mentioned last week about the Jewishness of text, this makes it, regardless of who wrote it exactly and how it was used, it's a very Jewish text because it uses and builds upon the prior prophecies in many places. And that's in the league of who will be the rabbis afterwards, or Philo, or any other Jew 2,000 years ago, where you're constantly commenting, reading, rereading, interpreting, and reinterpreting the older texts. So many would say that this John, who is not considered in scholarly circles today to be the same John as the Gospel of, but this John is certainly sees himself as prophetic. And that's an interesting thing. This is prophetic literature, as opposed to, say, a gospel, which is not as prophetic because it's a story about Jesus. And while it's more like a commentary on the prophets, this is pretty prophetic. The beginning of the book has 7 dreams. By the way, in the book itself, I see the hand. I'll get to you in just a second. In the book itself, there are a series of 7. Some you can see a structure of 7 times 7, and then another way to see 6 times 6. That I think lends a lot of mysticism or mystical approach to this book by many, but it could also be intentional the way it was written or the way it was edited, I should say. So before I go on, we'll go on to the 7 letters to the 7 communities. But go ahead, Charles. You had a question? No? Okay, I see a hand up. You have that little hand up. All right. Okay. It's funny because I can never figure out how to put that little hand up, but that's fine. So. We're not going to do all 7 of the letters, and we already have a challenge when the letters they seem to be kind of like it says letter to the angel, angelos. So angelos is angel, but it also means messenger. And so is the interlocutor here, interlocutor, I should say, I don't know how to pronounce that word. Is it a flesh and bones leader of the community, or is it an angel? Probably an angel in this same understanding that's in Daniel, that's in rabbinic literature, that each and every nation of the world have their own representative upstairs that sits at the heavenly court and does their bidding and protects them. And while in other contemporary circles there would be a limited amount of these angels, here each one of these communities gets their own angel. And so I brought just a few of the texts from a few of the communities here, not all 7, but I brought the ones that mention this particular word that gets used over and over again. So if you could read for us from Revelation 2:8 onwards, Pastor Jane.
Sure. I'm just going to read Revelations 2:8 through 11, right?
Okay.
Is that what you'd like?
Right. Let's start with that. Yeah.
Okay. I know your affliction and to the angel of the church of Smyrna write, these are the words of the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your affliction and your poverty, even though you are rich. I know the slander on the part of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what those who say that they are Jews and, do not fear what you are about to suffer. Beware, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison so that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have affliction. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Whoever conquers will not be harmed by the second death.
Okay. So without knowing the historical reality of what's going on in Smyrna, and that's of course important to historians, but for us, I think, is this term this term a synagogue of Satan, and then afterwards mentioning the devil in that as well. Now, let me turn it to the participants today, especially those that grew up Christian or those that maybe heard certain things hurled at them as Jews. Did anybody grow up with a particular understanding of what this is referring to in Revelation? And it's gonna come up another time, but just for now, synagogue of Satan. Anybody? Okay, meaning that Steve, you want to say something?
I've always heard of the Church of Satan, but I've never heard of the Synagogue of Satan. When I was reading the prep, that's one thing that stuck out to me. I thought to myself, well, I think there are groups that call themselves the Church of Satan, believe it or not, because I've seen it posted, but I've never heard the term just church, Synagogue of Satan till today.
I'm no expert at the Church of Satan and those kind of things. I guess it comes from another area of religion, of contemporary religion.
Yeah, I think they might be actual Satanists.
Yeah, Satanists.
Yeah, exactly.
And who knows how much of that relies upon a Christian understanding of Satan? That could also be. But we're going to talk a little bit later about where the word comes from or where the name comes from. So I think
just always think of the church lady.
The church lady, meaning
Saturday Night Live, what's his face? They used to do like the church lady. Like, could that be Satan? That's always what I think of.
I see. Okay, so let's let me put up on the screen before we go on just something that is out there in the Christian world. And hold on, let's see if I can get to it this way. And by no means all inclusive of the Christian world, just it's kind of out there. And this is a pastor whose name is Stephen L. Anderson in a place called Tempe, Arizona. Now he
Yep, just good. Okay.
Okay, please mute yourselves if you're not speaking. Okay. I just have a tech issue here, sorry.
We're not getting it.
Yeah, I know. It's on. We're on our way.
Oh, okay.
Almost there.
Okay. We'll of course blame Satan if there's a problem.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Hello, this is Pastor Stephen Anderson from Faith Forward Baptist Church in Tempe, Arizona. Today I want to talk about Revelation 2:9. In the last video, we showed in Romans 2:28 and 29 that he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, the Bible told us. Neither is that circumcision, which is outward in the flesh, but he is a Jew, which is one inwardly. Keep that in mind as we read Revelation 2:9. The Bible reads, I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Now in Romans 2:28, he said he's not a Jew, which is one outwardly. That means that when God looks today at the people that call themselves Jews, he said if they don't believe in Jesus Christ, Philippians 3:3, then they're not circumcised in the heart. They're not a Jew of the heart. They're a Jew outwardly, but God does not regard them as such. So that's why in Revelation chapter 2, verse 9, he talks about people who say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. So when the Jews today say, we're Jews, God says they're lying, because he says he's not a Jew, which is one outwardly. Neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh, but he's a Jew which is one inwardly. Now, there have been a lot of people over the years who've talked about who the synagogue of Satan represents, as if there's any question about it, as if there's any mystery about it. There's only one religion in the world that uses synagogues. That would be Judaism. So when God talks about the synagogue of Satan, that's clearly who he's talking about. By the way, they're the only people who go around saying, we're Jews, when really God says they're not, because they don't believe in Christ. So it's a pretty clear fit, especially when you get the context of the next verse. Because right after he says they say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan, he says in verse 10, fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I'll give thee a crown of life. Why would God go directly from talking about the blasphemy of the synagogue of Satan straight into a verse about Christians being persecuted? That's because if you read the book of Acts, the Jews are always the ones persecuting the Christians. In fact, as you read the entire book of Acts, you'll never find the Romans persecuting the Christians one time in that book. But over and over again, it is always the Jews who persecute the Christians in almost every single chapter. That's why he associates the synagogue of Satan, those who say they are Jews and are not, with persecution of believers, because they were the ones who were doing it at that time. There's no doubt about it. Judaism today is the synagogue of Satan.
Well, there's no doubt about it that this guy is a little bit off. I say off because he's blatantly homophobic as well. And the good news is it's harder to find this clip than it was when I first started researching this stuff. It's much harder. I knew it. I knew what I was looking for, so I could find it. It doesn't come up, and I think a lot of his stuff has been taken off of. I know a lot of his stuff has been taken off of YouTube, which is good news because it's hate language. It really is hate language. And I'm happy that this was not the experience, or at least the experience that people wanted to share here from their childhoods. And I don't believe it's something that's said in our neighborhood anywhere. I just don't. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that people go that way out here. But I do understand that he has a large following. There's another site called GodTube, which has a number of different kind of out there. It seems to be out there, but they have millions and millions of views. So it's something for us to be aware of. And you see how he tied it into last week's study as well. And actually, that's not why I prepared the study. It's the way it just happened to be. So he knows his stuff. He knows his words, and he's constantly, like many other Baptist, he's Baptist, or other certain kinds of evangelical speakers, it's always about what the text proves. It's not me, it's the text says it. It's always about this is got to know it from your Bible. But of course, the text is always understood, not just the text, but the King James Version in his case and others. It's all about the Word of God directly, and not the critical approach we're taking here. So before we go on to the rest of the passage and then putting into context, any comments about this? Yes, go ahead, Alan. Just unmute, please.
I've never heard anything in my life that I find so repulsive than what this man was just saying. I'm 78 years old, and I never, ever hope to hear anything like that ever, ever again. I don't care who he is, what he believes, he should be taken off the air and not permitted to speak. That is ridiculous language that he's using. He's twisting history to suit himself, and I have no compassion in my heart for someone like that.
If I was going to be humorous, I would say that's not very Christian of you not to have compassion in your heart for. But I think what I do want to say, Alan, is that we can find the same kind of stuff, the same flavor in our own Jewish world, and it can be found in Muslim world. It can be found in Hindu-Muslim polemic in India. Unfortunately, that's where people go with it. All of our faith traditions, maybe not the Baha'is, maybe they've stayed out of this somehow, but most of the faith traditions have been weaponized one way or another. And I don't want anybody here to think that there are not Jews who would say the same thing. Maybe they wouldn't put it up on YouTube. But believe me, I heard plenty of sermons in my day. In the Orthodox world, in the world of the most extreme settlers in Palestine, Israel-Palestine, there are people that educate their children on the hatred of the other based on them not accepting the right way, not doing the right thing. And so we can't be absolved. We're not totally guiltless in this case. Not in the same words, not in the same ways. But we're going to find that calling somebody else Satan is actually no big deal 2,000 years ago. But I know it's shocking. But anybody else have something to say? Yes,
John
Steve.
Jones.
Oh,
Sorry.
Well, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I feel like some people hijack Jesus, or they hijack, a certain person to get their way. In no way does that represent Christianity to me, or Judaism, or anything. It's just unkind and cruel.
great.
And in some ways, I don't know how far he has to reach up his butt to get some of that crap.
Okay.
It's really ridiculous.
Okay. Thanks for thank you for that.
Sorry.
That's all right. John.
My experience last week and this week, to hear him within a few words, I associate him with the occasional, if I can call it a sermon, from people. He will have in a year's time, I am convinced, similar sermons condemning all sorts of Christians that are not 100% in his little tiny narrow plot of his personal influence versus the whole world. It's hate.
I hate to think of what he's saying about Democrats.
Well, he does Roman Catholic bashing as well. Yeah. And if he doesn't do any Orthodox Christian bashing, it's probably just because he's not aware, he's not exposed to them.
Probably, yeah.
Gary?
I found his argument circular. He didn't prove anything. He just went in a circle, round and round, and stop at some place and then continue on the circle. His answer was his proof. His proof was his answer. It was like, the other thing that, and this always bothers me, I resent anybody telling me what I am. And he has the audacity to say to all of us, you're not what you say you are.
Mm.
He has no right to that. I barely can tell me what I am. I don't know.
So I don't think it would be smart for us to say that it's about him. This is kind of a sucker punch, right? Putting him up there, it's just so easy to shoot him down, right? But I certainly believe that he is echoing. He didn't make this stuff up. I don't think he made this shit up. This is stuff that he's received in his own particular tradition. Things that have been said. This is stuff that's been said out there in the world, in churches for hundreds of years. And while it might be a misreading of the simple meaning of the text, as we will, I think, show today, that didn't stop it from being used. There are church fathers that use this as well. I chose not to bring them today because I'd like to take this in a little bit different, a different way of expanding on this. But I think we would be missing the point if we just chose this guy, right, to focus our anger on. Okay? Yes, Gary. Sorry, we're not getting you. You're on mute. You've got to unmute yourself. Sorry.
It's not just in the church. I was coming out of Temple Isaiah. It was about 5 years ago now. And I'm getting into my car, and a car comes around the corner, and a woman rolls down her window and yells, "Christ killer," at me and drives away. I yelled, "Get a life." But, it's not just people preaching in churches. That's the result of people preaching in churches or elsewhere.
Okay. All right, then. So let's go on to the next letter to the community of Pergamum.
And to the angel of the church of Pergamum write, these are the words of him who has the sharp two-edged sword. I know where you are living, where Satan's throne is. Yet you are holding fast to my name, and you did not deny your faith in me, even in the days of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed among you, where Satan lives. But I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold up the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the people of Israel, so that they would eat food sacrificed to idols and practice fornication. So you have some who hold the teachings of the Nicolaitans. Repent then. If not, I will come to you soon and make war against them with the sword of my mouth. That anyone who has an ear, listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. To everyone who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give a white stone. And on the white stone is written a new name that no one knows except the one who receives it.
Okay, so being apocalyptic literature talking about the end of days, there's always secrets that are known to the cool kids. The cool kids get to know the secrets, the others don't. But we see from the second letter that this author here, he's not angry just at that community that pretends to be Jews. We'll get back to that in a second, what that might mean. By calling them synagogue, but in the second one, he's equally angry, and Satan comes in again, right? This case where Satan's throne is, I think many commentators would agree, Satan's throne is an altar to the sun god. We'll talk more about that later, Helios, that was found in churches that were synchronistic. Is that the right way to say it? It's syncretistic. They were, I don't want to say like Jews for Jesus today, Messianic Jews, which is a kind of synchronism as well, because that would take us down the wrong path, I think, and then we may have people here that are part of that community. I do want to say though that it's a kind of it was angry at a Christian community that was not keeping the law or the doctrine, whatever it was in this John's eyes, properly. So once it was those that pretended to be Jews, now it's the ones who have an altar in their church. That's what most scholars seem to say here, that I saw here. And then Satan. It seems that this guy's pretty preoccupied with Satan, right? Okay.
He was the church lady of his time.
There you go, church. Now I know what you're referring to because I have
Harvey. Yeah.
Because I also have seen in certain churches where there's people that I've talked to from certain church communities, not from yours, that do talk about Satan, a lot about Satan, and preachers in this town that have a lot to say about Satan and what is the modern day equivalent, what is the contemporary equivalent of Satan in our world. And sometimes it's messages I could agree with. If somebody says, that running after money and clicks, Instagram hits or whatever, how many followers you have could be a type of Satan as well. I wouldn't use that because it's too loaded of a term, but I understand where they're going. So now we go to Thyatira, I don't know how to pronounce it, but to another community.
Pronounced it correctly. And to the church in Thyatira, these are the words of the Son of God, who has eyes like a flame of fire and whose feet are like burnished bronze. I know your works, your love, faith, service, and patient endurance. I know that your last works are greater than the first. But I have this against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet and is teaching and beguiling my servants to practice fornication and to eat food sacrificed to idols. I give her time to repent, but she refuses to repent of her fornication. Beware, I'm throwing her on a bed, and those who commit adultery with her I'm throwing into great distress, unless they repent of her doings. And I will strike her children dead. And all the churches will know that I am the one who searches minds and hearts, and I will give to each of you as your works deserve. But to the rest of you in Thyatira, do not hold to this teaching, who have not learned what some call the deep things of Satan. To you I say, I do not lay on you any other burden, only hold fast to what you have until I come. To everyone who conquers and continues to do my works to the end, I will give authority over the nations. to rule them with an iron rod, as when clay pots are shattered, even as I also received authority from my Father. To the one who conquers, I will also give the morning star. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches.
Again, Satan comes in here. Now, we don't know who this Jezebel was. It could have been, for all we know, it could have been a woman who was preaching herself, and this guy was misogynistic. And then he frames her as, gives her the name of Izebel, of Jezebel, who was a wicked queen in the Book of Kings. Or perhaps this was a woman who was a priestess of sorts, who was involved also with a Christian community and marrying the two. Does that mean she had a brothel as well, which might be heard from the way it continues? I'm guessing not. That's the typical way of men who have problem with women, the way they like to talk about the female threat. But again, it's the deep things of Satan, and there's nothing about the Jews here. That's kind of my point. If you haven't figured out yet, we're not doing all the letters. One more letter to finish off. We're skipping some text now, but this one has partially something to do with the Jews. Philadelphia.
Okay. And to the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these are the words of the Holy One, the true one, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, who shuts and no one opens. I know your works. Look, I have set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. I know that you have but little power, and yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. I will make those of the synagogue of Satan who say that they are Jews and are not, but are lying. I will make them come and bow down before your feet, and they will learn that I have loved you. Because you have kept my word of patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. I am coming soon. Hold fast to what you have, so that no one may seize your crown. If you conquer, I will make you a pillar in the temple of my God, and you will never go out of it. I will write on you the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem that comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches.
So here, the people he's talking to they're only going to have some contact with those pretend Jews, and that he mentions it, by the way. So, but the address is not to, and very often you see in a book, Synagogue of Satan, and then in parentheses, Revelation 2:9, Revelation 3:9. Well, that's fine and well, but it's taken out of context. What I wanted to do in this short study, this very brief study of just 3 or 4 of these letters, is to talk about the context in which these words were said. You would have noticed, you would have heard a lot of words that are reminiscent of Daniel in different ways, the breaking of the clay, the bronze, those kinds of things. You would have heard a lot of words that are resonant from other places, including things like the New Jerusalem, that their source may be here as well. But it shows how this book, Revelation, although it's at the end of the New Testament and maybe didn't get in so easily to the canon, it's what I've read a little bit. It was controversial, but it's in that conversation. It's in the conversation of what was before, and it's in the conversation of what's going forward. And to me, that's the fascinating part of this here. It's one more strand in this conversation. And before we go on to talk about what else was happening from a rhetorical point of view at the same time this book was written, some authors see this as late as 2nd century, some commentators, but I've read a lot that shows at different stages of the 1st century, from around the 60s to after the destruction of the temple in 70, maybe up to the 80s and 90s, which could mean it's the same person who lived during different periods, or it could mean it's different sources that have been brought together with a more critical way. I don't know, and perhaps one day I'll go into greater depth in this book, but for now, I do want to relate to it as a 1st century example of 1st century literature that comes from the wide definition of the Jewish world, comes from the Jewish world. So before we go on, any comments or questions about what we've done?
Rabbi
Okay.
David, I just wanted to add a couple more things from my study of the book of Revelation and the lens that we taught the class. A lot of progressive Christian scholars look at the book of Revelation as a sort of insider, like I always show like the Matrix actually for my first class of the book of Revelation, because when he takes the pill and then he's able to kind of see the world as it really is, as opposed to the way he's been brainwashed to see it, because it's a real indictment of empire, of the way that it would in that time it would have been the Roman Empire, but the Greek Empire, the Persian Empire, any empire, and the way empire works to kind of brainwash you into thinking, as could say about today, that, and as we see in Russia, that your empire is like the best, and you just are kind of bullied and propagandized into worshiping it. And Asia Minor, where these churches are, was a very pro Rome area, and Caesar really wanted that area because it was far from Rome. He wanted everybody in that area to love Rome, so he gave them all sorts of perks. And so this writer is trying to tell the community, or well, I don't know if it's that community, but the Revelation is trying to show Christians to not bow to the emperor. Do not say Jesus is, Caesar is Lord like other Caesars would. Do not go to the temple of Caesar and worship. This is really how ugly and horrible Rome. So I just wanted to share that for those of you who might think, what in the hell is this book doing in the Bible anyway? And if it's so hated and misunderstood, it is very misunderstood. But I find it to be incredibly, from that lens, an incredibly helpful book to talk about how we're brainwashed by imperial psychology and imperialism. So.
Okay, good.
That's why I like to call it the Mad Magazine.
The Mad Magazine. Yeah. Anything else before we? Okay. So I brought the example of this Anderson fellow. There's another link, Jocelyn Anderson, who, as far as I can tell, is not related to him, but also goes on and on. It's not a good recording. It's a poor recording. She's a very prolific author. I actually bought one of her books on Kindle the other day just to see. Not the kind of stuff that talks to me much, of course. Not because it's Christian. It's not the kind of literature I really. It's a self-help kind of a literature. She's an interesting woman in that she came forward about her own being abused, domestically abused, and wrote about it, and apparently helps women in the same situation. So for that, I'm there it is, right? For all I know, this other Anderson guy, he's got some wonderful characteristics about him as well. Hard to see it, somebody who talks like that on YouTube, but this woman is a little bit different. But still, she's kind of obsessed with the Synagogue of Satan thing, at least in that little sermon she gives. But there's something that we all kind of barely remember about. I mean, I didn't know much about Billy Graham growing up, other than he was not considered to be a positive character in my household, right? And certainly Nixon was not. I'm not taking a political stand here, but I remember even at I grew up in California. Nixon, of course, was the governor here at one time, and we, as a family, were not in favor of him. But when he was elected as president finally, and then he went to China. I remember saying to my dad, bless him, marry me, Dad, Nixon, but can't you say a good thing about him? He went to China, like, oh, this is like a new world. He opened it up. And my father could not, in no way could say a positive. No, it must have been other reasons he was going. Don't fall into that trap, David. It's not. And so thinking back to Nixon, and there's a passage here from the new Nixon tapes. These are not the original tapes that were leaked, but that came out later in '73. So maybe we'll ask somebody to read it. I don't know who are the readers here. John, you want to read this? I know you can read well. From the Nixon tapes.
It's in another room in my house right now.
Okay, the Nixon tapes themselves. Okay, so Richard, you got them? You have them in front of you?
Unmute. Okay. Startling too is the information that continues to come out about the Reverend Billy Graham's anti-Semitism, showing how he raised the subject of Jews with Nixon and commiserated with him about the Synagogue of Satan and Jews who promote pornography and obscenity. He added in a statement, while never expressing these views in public, Reverend Graham unabashedly held forth with the president with the age-old classical anti-Semitic canards.
And that kind of explains why maybe some of you never heard this growing up in the church, right? Because they weren't the things that were said to children. Maybe they weren't the things that were said in sermons, but they seem to be the things that were said behind closed doors. At least in the 20th century, where 20th century, the United States, where Jews have a certain prominent position, and you can't really get away with saying those things. So that's contemporary, right? Or in the last few hundred years, perhaps. I wish I had more examples of this, but and I'm sure there are. I don't really know how to look for this kind of stuff. I was hoping to find a movie, by the way, from the 30s or the 40s or something, an old movie with a character, a preacher or character who's going on who's portrayed as being anti-Semitic. There must be something out there, but I don't know where to find it. But I do kind of know where to find things in late antiquity, especially in the land of Israel. And here's an example from the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Dead Sea Scrolls were found. You probably know the story. They were found by a shepherd boy by accident. He threw a stone inside, and then they were sold for nothing. And then the first ones, and then there were others that went back to find. And even today, there are people that are still looking in different caves and crevices for scrolls from 2000, from 1900 years ago, from 2200 years ago, scrolls that were been preserved because it's so hot and dry there, and they're in these sealed jars, or were. The scrolls are divided into biblical texts, which sometimes give us more or less the same text that we have in our Hebrew Bibles today, which are taken from manuscripts from, say, the 9th, 10th century. They're not ancient manuscripts that the printers copied from, but older. And sometimes the text is different. That's the most fascinating part, where we have an ancient Hebrew text that represents a different text than the accepted Hebrew version today. Sometimes we find agreement, as I mentioned before, we find agreement between the Greek translation, the Septuagint, and what we understand would be the Hebrew that was translated from, and what's in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But those are the biblical texts. Then we have we have sectarian texts. Sectarian texts mean the texts that are particular to the communities, and not just one, but the communities that lived in that area. Often they're called the Essenes, the Essenes, Isiim in Hebrew, but that's also a little bit oversimplifying. There are things that are found in these texts that sometimes connect with, and that's why the Christian world was super, super excited about this in the 60s, and assumed that because the text took so long to be publicized, I'll tell you why in a second, that there was something that was damaging to both the Christian and Jewish traditions, so people assumed that they were being kept secret. But there are things that ring a bell with, especially John the Baptist. And by the way, in critical scholarship of Revelation, many people propose that the nucleus of Revelation, or part of it, is from those that continued in the vein not of Jesus as much as John the Baptist. So this is in that same world of literature, because it sounds, there's a lot of things that are common to both of them. By the way, the Dead Sea Scrolls were not published. It took them so long to be published because of ego. The scholars that got a hold of them, they wanted to be the ones that would publish these to the world. And slowly they got older, so they would give them to their students, but not to other students. If people want to see them, they wouldn't let them see it. And this happened to me, not working. With Dead Sea Scrolls, I got to work with the actual scrolls. Got to look at the fragments. Not that it helped me much because I wasn't trained in that, but my teacher in graduate school, Professor Emmanuel Tov, had just been appointed the new head of the whole project to bring all these scrolls to publication. So that was in the 80s, late 80s, second half of the 80s. But until then, there were so many things that weren't published. And But I remember once wanting to publish an article, and I needed access to a certain manuscript. And my professor, my sponsor asked that guy, and he said, why does he want it? And he said, why? I said, no, I'm publishing stuff on that now. And meanwhile, the guy died and never published on it. That's the horrible part of humanities. In any case, we go back to this. I went way off the track. I apologize. So here's a text, the Manual of Discipline, Serach HaYachad it's called. Serach HaYachad, Yachad means oneness, unity. These are the bylaws, if you will. Not the only set. There's different kinds of these texts. They're different than the Jewish legal texts of the rabbis. There are some texts that are like that in Qumran. When I say Qumran, that's the place, but that means the Dead Sea Scrolls. But this one is actually kind of their bylaws of this community. And so here we have this, okay? And the Levites shall curse all the men of the lot of Satan. And that is in Hebrew, Kol Anshe Goral Blial. Now the word Satan doesn't appear in the Hebrew. Here the word Blial appears. And Blial is found in biblical literature. It's found quite a bit in Dead Sea Scrolls, which is kind of a word. We don't know exactly the etymology of it. It could be somebody's name, a group of people that were just really nasty, and they become like, what became of the word Philistines afterwards in the English language in certain circles. But Blial is are the no goodniks, the good for nothings, right? Whatever, and often the same what would be said about those that are the children of Satan is said about the children of Belial. It's almost they're interspersed. And anyway, be cursed because of all your guilty wickedness. May he deliver you up for torture at the hands of vengeful avengers. So that's kind of, who are the avengers? Angels that are doing God's will, but in a violent way. May he visit you with destruction by the hand of the wreakers, another kind of, the wreakers of revenge. Be cursed without mercy because of the darkness of your deeds. Be damned in the shadowy place of everlasting fire. May God not heed when you call upon God, nor pardon you by blotting out your sin. May God raise God's angry face towards you for vengeance. May there be no peace for you peace for you in the mouth of those who hold fast to the fathers. And after the blessing and the cursing, all those entering the covenant shall say, Amen ve'amen. So this is the initiation ritual that was done, at least the way it purports to be here. And it's pretty nasty, right? We're talking about these people, brothers and sisters and former neighbors. They're all Jews. These are Jews talking about Jews. That's my point. Right? Not to justify it, but to put it into cultural context. This is the rhetoric of the age. When you disagree with somebody about religious doctrine, you call them a schmuck, right? In many, many different ways. Any comments or questions on this before we go on?
That's quite a colorful way of calling someone a schmuck, I must say. Like the word schmuck, and then there's a whole paragraph of like, may you be hailed with fire and all that kind of stuff. So colorful.
Right. Yes, Alan.
I'm curious how this has to do with John the Baptist.
Oh, this particular text doesn't have to do with John the Baptist, but there are texts from the Qumran library that do have to do it. One of the main things I think is this emphasis on dipping or immersion in the mikveh, right? In this way, the key, being the single most important act, right? Is that's how you purify yourself. Of course, you've got to purify your inside, but you've got to do them together, and that's a combination of the priestly laws of the Hebrew Bible and a desire for it to be. To answer the needs that many of the prophets bring up, as well as that, hey, it's not all about the sacrifice, it's about being a mensch, right? Being a good person as well. So bringing those two worlds together, they were very big on bathing and ritual purity. More stringent than the Pharisees, for instance, who lived at the same time.
Thank you.
Well, I have one comment too, that from what I've been in the reading that I'm doing, is we all look at all this with a Western philosophy, Western upbringings, Western way of thinking. And we're looking at the Middle East, and you were there extensively, apparently, Rabbi, and it's such a different way of looking at things and people and living. Even up to the early 1900s, 1930s, you would, if someone was of a different religion, you'd cross the road. You wouldn't associate with them. You wouldn't have them in your home. And it's a different way of looking at life. People are in each other's lives. They were sharing clothes, sharing food, sleeping everybody together in the same place. It's such a different way of looking at life. And I find myself more and more thinking, don't think about it the way I look at things. I have to get into the realm of how it is there still in many respects. And if you look at the Syria refugees and the way they're living, it's very similar to back to that time. It hasn't changed that much. Of course, in the cities it's different. But so I always think we have to temper what we're saying and thinking with that in mind. That's all.
Okay, so thank you, Patty, for that. So this kind of throws us back to the 19th century. 19th century, when the European biblical scholars, German, British, French, they were coming to the Middle East, and they were looking at the Bedouin who lived there and projecting directly on that, oh, that must be the understanding of what was happening in biblical times. And so I understand what you're saying, and there were a few parts of what you said, because there's also the violence part of it as well. And there is a difference between Western and other thinking around the world. But there's something, it's making assumptions, and many would say it's part of that overall Orientalism of romanticizing that world. And that even made its way into the desert here as well in the early 20th century, with people coming back from the early date industry, coming back with things from the Middle East and naming things. For instance, I've shared with you many times before, I was very surprised in my first year here to see a headline in the Desert Sun that said something like, rockets smash the Arabs. That's the headline I saw at a Starbucks. We remember when there used to be newspapers outside of Starbucks. I said, what could that possibly mean? Well, I come from Israel. I mean, there's no war in Gaza going on right now, whatever. And then I saw it was from the sports section. And there's a team called the Rockets, and there's a team called the Arabs. Yes, the Coachella High School team is called the Arabs. You know, and what? Can you imagine if somebody called the team the Jews? Maybe they do. Maybe Yeshiva University, they call them the Jews. But the Arabs, and their mascot was considered to be offensive. There was a court case in the 80s about it, whatever the Anti-Defamation League is for the Muslim community in the United States. What I'm saying is that there was that Orientalism that was prevalent, was even brought to our area here. It's kind of a romanticizing of that world. So that's not what you said, Patty, but I want to warn us from romanticizing the world. I want to go back to something that I think John, or at what Gary said in the very beginning. And that is, when other people tell other people, and this is not what you said, Patty, it just sparked it reminded me I want to say something about this. When some people tell other people who they are, without them saying themselves who they are. And I meant to mention this last time we met, because these are the 3 rules of interfaith dialogue that Bishop Christer Stendahl, who was the Bishop of Stockholm and afterwards was a professor at either Yale or I think at Yale School of Divinity, he really fueled or started the first serious interfaith dialogue in Sweden amongst Jews and Christians. Muslims hadn't really gotten there much yet. And he said there were 3 rules that one must always believe, and of course that includes all religions. Number 1, learn about the religion from the person who's practicing the religion, whose tradition it is, right? As opposed to just a book or just what I've heard that Hindus, whatever. Okay. Number 2, don't compare your best to their worst, or their worst to your best, right? We could say, oh, those Christians, look what they did in the Crusades, right? I mean, a Muslim might say that. Of course, look what in other ages Muslims did when they were fighting against Christians, and look what Jews have done from time to time when they've had the power, or look what's happening today. We got to be really careful about when we're making comparisons. And the 3rd is my favorite, of course, which is always have a sense of holy envy, meaning look for something in the other person's religion that you say, damn, I wish I had that. So that's kind of the thing that I say often when I'm in church and I see people taking communion, and they're very, very deeply into it. And I kind of say, wow, that's really cool. Does that mean I want to do it, introduce it into Or Hamibar's services? No, I will say again publicly, that's not the way we do things. We're very open in talking and studying together and in praying together, but not necessarily that. For me personally, that's a line that you've heard me tell before. I was in Taizé. Until the pandemic would go every year, and I was there once with one of my colleagues from Jerusalem who had been there even before me. He was the one who originally told me to go there in 2001, Rabbi Levi. And we're sitting with our backs to the wall because the kids all sit on the floor there, and we're old cockers, and we got to have some. But we're from the distance, and they're all lining up to get communion. And he nudges me like this. He says, "I won't tell if you won't tell." But we didn't do it. Right, we didn't do it. So I tell those stories quite often, maybe too often. What I'm trying to say, holy envy is important, and back to these things here. Yes, the Middle East is different. My own experience, Patty, is that of an American living, and the state of Israel is in the Middle East, but very often runs according to principles that are taken from the West, right? From Europe, from the United States. And so, not the best of examples, but, and then finally, we know of a lot of interaction between all those communities, and that this goes to the point that you made about them living together and wearing the same clothes. It's not just the people of the same place. The people themselves may have had very different, and this is the main point of why I brought this, they may have had very different ideologies and theologies, but they still lived in the same places together. And very often they ate, they bought in the same markets, and they traveled on the same paths, and it wasn't as segregated as I think we might understand. And it could be they were even praying in the same synagogues. There were people that were praying in synagogues that the rabbis they were listening to in their intellectual lives or their practice at home were Pharisaic rabbis. And maybe the head of the synagogue, though, was more of a Christian. We don't know enough about this. And it's probably best to assume that there was far more integration than we think of. At least that's how I was taught. Let's go on to the passage from the Talmud. Now, the Babylonian Talmud wasn't edited, as I think I mentioned last week, to the 6th, 7th century, but it contains lots of traditions from beforehand. And we kind of know how to place the names of rabbis, assuming that the quote is correct. And there's really no reason for that somebody would make this quote up. After we read it, I think you'll agree with me. Why would somebody make this quote up? And this is from a rabbi who lived in the 1st, 2nd century, right? So from the same time as this, right? Dosa ben Hyrcanus, Dosa the son of Hyrcanus. Hyrcanus is a Greek name, as is Dosa, by the way. But he's a rabbi who is part of the group that will later be, that are probably, by that time, they're called the Pharisees, at least by Jesus. So he's part of the group that Jesus was part of, as far as I feel. That's how I feel, at least. And Jesus is speaking out against. And there were in that group itself, they were broken into camps. The group of those that would be called the Pharisees, there are two major schools of thought, the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. And so here's something that reflects that. In the time of Rabbi Dosa ben Hyrcanus, the sages permitted the rival wife of a daughter to the brothers. Without going into detail, think of the story of Judah and Tamar in Genesis 38, where Judah has a son married to a woman named Tamar. That son dies without having children, so the next son is in line to take her under his wing so that the children will be born and named after that brother who died. That's called Yibum, or the Levirate marriage, and there's lots of legal material about this. And to this very day in the state of Israel, it is still it's not enforced as in brothers have to marry their late brothers' wives, but it's enforced that unless you do the ceremony that gets you out of that, you can't get married, either the woman, the widow, or the brother of. So it's a pretty major thing in Jewish law, not in the Jewish progressive world that I and the people on the call from Or Midbar belong to. In any case, he said to them, the halakha is in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel. That's all that matters to us. The Jewish law, the legal, it's according to Beit Hillel, he says. But they said to him, but didn't you say, they say in your name that the halakha, that the law is accordance to the opinion of Beit Shammai? He said, we heard differently, that it's not according to the school of Hillel, it's according to the school of Shammai. He said to them, did you hear that Dosa ben Hyrcanus issued this ruling? Or did you hear that it was stated by Ben Hyrcanus? Was it only the son of Hyrcanus? Or did you hear explicitly Dosa? Did you hear my name, David Lazar? Or did you hear just Lazar? That's what it'd be like. And they said, on your life, Rabbi, all we heard was simply Ben Hyrcanus. We just heard the family name. He said to them, this should be on the next line, sorry. If so, it is no wonder, because I have a younger brother who is the firstborn of Satan. My younger brother is the firstborn of Satan, and his name is Yonatan, shaming him publicly, right? And he is among the disciples of Shammai. It is he who issued the ruling. That son of a bitch. And yet, he's my brother, right? What am I trying to say here? There aren't a lot of passages I could find, but this is a doozy. Because this is not only a Jew calling a Jew the son of Satan, but not only in the same group of the Pharisees, but a brother, right? And yes, we have history, we have brothers that are fighting with each other, but I think what I want to say here is that this is just the rhetoric was like this in those days. Does that excuse us from our point of view if it's misused today? Absolutely not. But it is a way of me saying to my Jewish brothers and sisters, when you see this, take a deep breath, calm down. It's not the end of the world that somebody called somebody pretend Jews and they're the synagogue of Satan. No, synagogue of Satan, Satan. You know, that's kind of the first way of de-weaponizing this. Maybe let's everybody calm down for a second. And while we want people to be careful, we want this Anderson guy to not to speak like this publicly. Still, I would say to my people, okay, so he said it. It's his rhetoric. It's his own little world. I know, and I'm not. You know, it's problematic what I'm saying because speech does hurt and speech does matter. But it is maybe a way of thinking of this. Yes. Did you want to say something? I see your no. Patty's just disagreed with me. Any comments, Steve?
When I heard that Anderson guy talk and everything, all I could do was laugh because that's the only response I could give was laughter, because I think that's the best way to insult him, is to laugh at him and to ridicule him by that way, by making it, because it was so stupid it was funny. And, you know, I have to try to look in the humor at it to get through it, because I'm not going to hate him. I'm not going to get angry at him. I'm going to just laugh at him. You know?
Just don't call your brother the son of an Anderson.
Oh my gosh, that's right.
Anyone else?
My brother is an Anderson. A stepbrother.
I'm sorry. Okay. So we could dwell on the damage that Anderson or this text has done for a long time, and that's the I want to go back to its original usage, is that here's a man who has a mission. Don't know all that much about him, but I want to assume that he wanted a better world. And his understanding of a better world was for people to accept Christ as Lord, right? And there's a whole thing in Book of Revelation. Sometimes Lord there, Kurios is used about Christ, and sometimes about God. Apropos our question as last week. Maybe good intentions, and in so a leader of sorts in a prophetic way, and writing these letters to these communities to either encourage them or discourage them from the way they are. So he sees himself in a leadership position, and he uses and the way he uses in his eyes is in a holy way. He's speaking from holiness. I don't know that he's necessarily speaking from hatred. He may be talking about people that are actually pretending to be something they're not to gain some sort of, we don't know, to gain some sort of benefit, right? You pretend to be, you know, for whatever it is, you pretend to be so that you can, I mean, we've had cases like that, right? You can you benefit from a particular law for minorities. You pretend to be a minority, right? Those stories come up from time to time. But and it would be right to say to somebody, listen, you're pretending to be somebody, and instead of somebody who really needs it, you're getting that instead of somebody, you're getting something that somebody really needs, and they are that person. So perhaps that kind of situation. What I'm trying to say is that I can posit a holiness context for the way this was said or written or published the way it is in the book of Revelation. But then it went from holiness to hatred. Not just the way that some of us read it the first time today, perhaps. Not just the way that Anderson uses it, not just the way that Billy Graham, but we understand and we know that been used over the centuries in a not so nice way, even though it's pretty easy to see that it's not condemning all the Jewish people, right? That as Jane said in the beginning, that's if you look at the context of the chapter, that's not what he's saying. He's talking about a particular group of people who he thinks are pretending. Whether they're pretending to be Jews by birth or whether they're pretending to be Jewish Christians, a complex question, but not to our point as much as, so the text was, I would say, misused, taken out of context for the sake of hatred. But now I ask us, in this group of the 28 of us that are here right now, what are we going to do? How might we think of this concept of a synagogue of Satan in a positive way? In a positive way, and I want to go back for that to the first usage of the name Satan in our combined texts comes from the book of Job. Book of Job, a very difficult book on many planes. It's difficult to read. It's difficult to understand. Difficult to read because it's a little bit boring. You can get bogged down in the theology of it. It's hard to understand exactly what it is. It's very often people read the first chapter and the last chapter, and they think that in that they know the story of Job. Well, they do know the narrative framework of Job. Job is a man who has wealth and everything's going, children and animals, and just a total, like the guy's a billionaire in their terms. And then it happens that day that God is sitting upstairs in heaven with God's chevra, with his group of his entourage. They're called B'nai Elohim. That's an interesting thing on itself. There's different passages in the Hebrew Bible that talk about the sons of God or the children of God. Who are they? Not referring to human beings. Are they angels? Are they demigods? Is it from a time when Adonai was not the only God, but the most supreme God? Are these older concepts that are left over in the Hebrew Bible? A lot of those things, but not the topic today. All it is this scene from like the Sistine Chapel, right? You're looking up in there and they're peeking down, right? God is with they're looking down, and God says, hey, look at my boy down there. Did you see my boy, Job? That's what we're going to read here in a second. I think Jane wants to say something.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you haven't yet seen it, I can not recommend highly enough the Coen brothers treatment of the book of Job, a movie called A Serious Man. And it was made about, maybe even as much as like 15 or 20 years ago. I hope you liked it, Rabbi David.
It was made about 15 years ago or so. Yeah. It was mid to late aughts.
Yeah, the Coen brothers, and it takes place in Minneapolis in the 1960s.
We should do a movie night about that. I'll tell you why. Because
I would love it.
I went to see it in Boulder, Colorado. I was visiting my friend Rabbi Mark Soloway, and another rabbi who was working up in Vail had come down, and we said we got to see this movie because we love the Coen brothers. And Mark's the president of his shul, Bonei Shalom. So the four of us go. Right, the four of us go, and there's maybe two other people in the movie theater, right? Okay, and then we're laughing, and I think to myself, of course we're laughing because it's about us. It's such a Jewish context, and we know about the Book of Job, but how could this possibly make money? How could this movie ever make money? Because how would people understand? And yet it did, right? So we should do a movie night of.
It would be great. I'd love it. Yeah, I was just thinking it would be. I would love to show it and have a conversation about it. Yeah, and it got lots of I don't know. It may have even won some Academy Awards. It was nominated for a bunch of awards. But yeah, it's a great film. Well, maybe that'll be our little treat after.
Right, for those that survive the entire course.
That's right. So stick in there, folks.
Amy, did you want to say something?
No, I'm sorry. I said sign me up for the movie night. I would
Okay.
love
Oh, okay. Well, that's something.
I
We
apologize.
can watch it. We can watch it in our sanctuary with our new movie screens and stuff.
Ooh, okay. All right. But you know what? Because we're all right time-wise, we're going to go back to this in a second, but there's one more layer of what this might have meant. And this I found in one of in the Anchor Bible commentary. I'm not sure I agree with this. Who am I to disagree with New Testament scholars, really? But I'll tell you, because I was raised in a different way, I want to show you something from two pictures of mosaic floors of late antiquity, the land of Israel, ancient Palestine, not from the 1st, 2nd centuries, but from the 4th to 6th centuries. I'm going to show you two pictures. Bear with me a moment. Apologies, should have been ready. Should give everybody time to get a cup of coffee. Getting there, we're getting there.
Just think about a serious man. And fun we'll have watching it.
I thought I would be.
Famous line I remember from Job is, he suffered the outrageous fortunes of slings and arrows.
And we talked about, you heard my sermon last Sunday, those of you who are in my church, it was part of my sermon, was looking at the book of Job, which is cracking open that fable, that kind of that easy fable, and looking at like the real wrestling that thinkers are giving to why do bad things happen to good people, and that question that so often gets asked. It's not a good question, but it's a question that we can't help but ask, thinking that that's God's job, is to give good things to people that do good and bad things to people that do bad. So if bad things happen to good people, like what? Clearly God's messed up, and that's actually one of the reasons I think a lot of people drop out of a faith tradition, is because, how could God allow what's going on in the Ukraine to happen if God's a good God, that kind of thing.
Okay, we'll get back to Job in just a second. So anybody know what they're looking at? Well, I didn't mean like where it's from. It's from a place called Beit Alpha, which is in the Galilee. It's from a synagogue floor. And the topic is not the entire mosaic floor, so it's only focused on the center of it. But perhaps you can imagine to yourself what's on the 12 panels around this inner circle are the zodiac signs of the months, of the seasons and the months. And this is Helios, the sun god, riding on a chariot. Now you could say, how do you know that? Because there's so many images of Helios from Roman culture. That are all sorts of artistic renditions that are from ancient times. So we know that's what he looks like. Those are the horses pulling the chariot, and that's the sun god. You can see the moon is subservient and the stars are subservient. And this is a humanization, an anthropomorphization of the sun god, right? Let me show you a few other. Two other versions that may be a little bit better, and then we'll talk about what do they mean. Why am I having such a hard time with this today? This is from Chamat Tiberia. So Tiberius, second. Let's do it this way. Maybe we can. And you see it's been damaged in the middle, right? And that, I believe, is an act of vandalism that happened in, I don't know, probably in the aughts, maybe. And but this is the floor of a synagogue. You can see this is Helios' sun god. We know because of the rays coming out of his head. You can see the signs of the zodiac, and these are the 4 signs of the seasons as well. Again, in a prominent synagogue, a beautiful synagogue here's a picture from the Beit Alpha synagogue in the whole context. Okay, so what do I want to say with these things? What I want to say is that these and other, first of all, there was no problem in these synagogues for pictures, for images. And some people understood in the 10 Commandments that you can't have any images. Well, that was never really, maybe it was in certain circles, but there's been Jewish art with human, picturing humans since the 3rd century of the Common Era that we have, the Synagogue in Dura Europos. And so that's one thing that the scholars, when they first found these in the beginning of the 20th century, they started to find these things, and they were clear they were synagogues. And then the other thing, of course, is aren't these pagan images? So one school of thought amongst archaeologists said, well, and these were probably more orthodox archaeologists. Well, no. These are just artistic images that were used in a time when nobody was practicing, right? So if this was from a synagogue in the 5th century, and 6th century, when Rome is no longer pagan Rome, then this was just using a pattern on your wall on your bathroom tiles, something that has no meaning. Other people say that these are examples of a kind of Judaism, a Hellenistic Judaism that didn't survive. Certain writings from Hellenistic Judaism survived, like Philo of Alexandria, the Septuagint itself. But these were Jews. They weren't Pharisees. They weren't early Christians. They were a different group. And it could be one of the commentaries. I can't pronounce her last name, but the Anchor Bible commentary, she leaves that as a possibility here. The Synagogue of Satan is referring to Hellenistic Jews that found a way to be a certain kind of synchronism, that they not just in art but also zodiac, and the whole idea of astrology is taken seriously in Judaism since we have Jewish writings, post-biblical writings. It's taken seriously. Some of the medieval rabbis were astrologers themselves. Yes, Jane?
Oh, I don't have any evidence, or I'm just kind of thinking, and I'm wondering if maybe there was also, and this was just like what he was complaining about, what John was complaining about in Christian circles, that there were synagogues and churches that were they were participating in emperor worship, and so that would be like the devil. That was the evil spirit, and so he is. We certainly know about those kind of churches today that think Donald Trump is the new Messiah and all that kind of stuff, and so I'm just wondering if maybe that phrase might have something to do with something like that.
So I think it's definitely a possibility, but I want to steer you away from the analogy with the Donald Trump worship kind of a thing, but to other lands, like there's a prayer for the state, for the king, for the queen, that Jews have in prayer books, and I would imagine you had them. If the king or the queen of that land is the same denomination that you are, what's the big deal? But when a Jew is praying for the sake of the czar, like I have a book that in the back there's a prayer book, and there's a prayer for the czar, and it's not the prayer from Fiddler on the Roof, right?
Right.
Not the one that says, may the czar be healthy and just far away from me, that kind of thing. Right. It's a prayer for the czar. And when I remember first seeing it, because they're facsimile editions of older printed books that were made very cheaply, that were sold in Jerusalem when I was buying books, when I was Orthodox. And because they had to, they were made to, they had no choice in it. So that might be also, Jane. In other words, I would better, rather than assume, they saw this horrible ruler that they went after, which might be implied by a certain analogy. Instead, they were forced to. Maybe they had to. Or maybe they felt they could get more benefits that way, again, benefiting from something. Okay, so now let's go to Job and why I brought it here, because the real part of the book of Job is about it's theological. It's about how do you justify Job, how do you figure this out, why there's bad in the world, etc. But the narrative framework of Job is not all that serious theologically. In fact, it's even problematic theologically, because it reflects an older version of the theology where God has his boys, his good old boys are there, and they're sitting around drinking whatever they are, and you see my boy, and you see my guy Job, he says, and that's the background here. Why don't we read that here? Jane, if you could read this from Job for us.
One day, the divine beings presented themselves before the Lord, and the adversary came along with them. The Lord said to the adversary / Satan, "Where have you been?" The adversary answered the Lord, "I have been roaming all over the earth." The Lord said to the adversary, "Have you noticed my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil." The adversary answered the Lord, "Does Job not have good reason to fear God? Why, it is you who have fenced him round, him and his household and all that he has. You have blessed his efforts so that his possessions spread out in the land. But lay your hand upon all that he has, and he will surely blaspheme you to your face." The Lord replied to the adversary, See, all that he has is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on him. The adversary departed from the presence of the Lord. And the guys just went back to drinking their beer.
Right. So the reason that there was the typo above was there was a little a as a explanation of that some translate, it would be a, italics a, some translate just put Satan. The adversary was kind of a novel thing with the New Jewish Publication Society translation of Job, which was done in the early 80s, I guess, 70s, 80s. And because that, according to the simple meaning of that word, that's what that means, to be an adversary of. And while he doesn't have a lot of, he doesn't get a lot of play, his roles are limited in the Hebrew Bible, Satan. Where it is here, it's very clear he's not an entity unto his own. He's subservient to God, and go ahead.
I think it might even be he's more of an adversary to humankind, because his job is to go around and tempt people so they can prove if they're faithful or not. Right? He's kind of adversary.
It's hard to extrapolate that from this text alone.
Sure. That
they would go for all people, but it could be very much that's how it was understood. And maybe this does reflect that idea, but I like the idea, and this idea of an adversary to be adversarial is not evil in itself, right? Depends who you're adversing, if that's a word, right? Who are you standing against? Who you're calling out? And what I thought of when I first started to deal with this text, and when Father Andrew pressed me, so but what can we say positive about this text? It would be taking it out of context, no doubt. Taking it out of context. First of all, seeing it in the context the way we did, the wider context of it's not so bad. But then taking it out of its context and saying, you know what? Let's be a synagogue of Satan. Let's be a church of Satan. Let's be a mosque of Satan, in that we are adversarial to the injustice, especially when it's in the name of the government. Especially when it's in the name of the denomination that we're part of. Especially that's in the name of local government or local industry or whoever it is who is causing other people to suffer. And to say this. And I'm not standing by this. I'm not about to call, I'm not about to change the byline of our stationery that says Ora Midbar, a satanic congregation, right? A true synagogue of Satan. I'm not about to do that, right? But I think you understand what I mean. Maybe this is a way, and that's what midrash is. Midrash is you kvetch, you squeeze the text until you get the drops that you need. And you could say, well, that's not the meaning, that's the real meaning of the text. Well, there's the original meaning of the text, which we covered. And then there's an eisegetical meaning of the text, and that's not bad by definition. We live not only by exegesis, all of us, I don't care what denomination you're in, we live by eisegesis as well when it comes to Scripture. We do find inspiration in Scripture for things in our lives that are not really connected to that, but it lets us go. Now, we got it, as long as we're conscious that's what we're doing. Personally, this rabbi thinks it's all right. And the student of the Bible thinks it's all right. Comments or questions, my friends? Including complaints. Yes, Alan.
And Mike, yourself.
Can you explain exegesis?
Oh, okay. So nothing to do with Jesus, by the way. So the word something which is exegetical is something that comes out of the text itself. It exits the text. Eisegetical means you have read into the text something. It's kind of oversimplifying it, but we've read into the text, and you find Bible scholars and some clergy as well that say, well, that's reading into the text. Well, I got news for them. I try to say it delicately. We're all reading into the text all the time. We always bring ourselves to the reading, whatever the text is. We bring ourselves. We bring our upbringing. We bring our society. We bring our ideology. We bring our traumas, whatever it is.
Thank you.
When you were asking if we could think of any benefits of the Synagogue of Satan, I thought, well, it gives the Church of Satan competition, right? That would be the only thing I could think of that would be beneficial or good, or good about it.
Yeah, I would just like to say another quick little thing, like from my understanding, and I'm going to share a little bit about this, I think, on Sunday. So that from what I understand from my studies is that the whole character of Satan underwent, and Elaine Pagels writes about this in her book, the character of Satan went through a transformation during the late before Christ BCE time. Whereas in the original, as I understand it, in the time of Job and the ancient times, the Satan was one of God's angels, one of the holy council or whatever, and his job was to go around, because there's only one God. So the only way that God can know if people are being faithful is to tempt them and to see how they do. So it was the part of that, like, the faithful would say, tempt me, God, and I'll show you how faithful I am. And I think you can find some Psalms that talk about that, I think. And I may be way off, but that was like God looked for the tempter to help him figure out who's getting it and who's not, and who I should bless and who I should not. And then when the Persian Empire came and the exiles returned to Israel, and the Persian influence, Persia was a dualistic religious culture. Zoroastrianism was their religion. So there was in Persian religion, there was a good God and a bad God, and they battle with each other. And the way that they battle inside people. So you don't want to have the bad God living in you, because you're being God's adversary, but not like a tempter. You're being like an actual enemy of God. And the way that the adversary works in you is by giving you all sorts of blessings, so you'll keep honoring the bad God. And that bad God in Christian thought became named Satan or the devil. And so then at that point, then in Christian thought, there's God, and then there's the Satan battling, and they're battling in you. So, like to get those evil spirits out of you that Jesus did, that was to like remove that bad God, so you'd be on the good God side. And Satan was then, it wasn't a tempter, it wasn't working with God, it was actually the complete enemy of God. But it's a very different understanding, because it was a different time and different influences culturally and theologically that the culture had been exposed to and was living with. So I don't know, David, if
No, I look at, but I wouldn't limit it to a particular time, right? Dualism, this dualistic way of looking at at the Godhead or what or gods has been around in a lot of places and even continues to a certain way in all the religions. In Jewish thought, in Jewish mysticism, there is the Sitra Achra, which literally means the other side.
Mm-hmm.
The other side, which is kind of, that's what I think of when I see Star Wars every time, right? And those are tales that and it's not always easy to understand or to differentiate between the good guy God and the bad guy God, and on one hand, and the good people, the good guys, and the bad guys down here on earth. So if we go back to Qumran, to the Dead Sea Scrolls, they were some of the texts are very into they're the sons of light against the sons of darkness, right? The children of light against the children of darkness. Also very dualistic in the way they see it. So it's not always an easy to delineate when you're talking about the heavens or when you're talking about down here.
But Rabbi David, was dualistic thinking common in the very ancient Jewish thought, like in the time of, when the Torah is being put together and
No. That's kind of, and many would say that comes from Hellenism, right? That comes from Greek culture, right? I'm not my expertise, but no, it's a late development, and so.
And that was kind of my point, that when you read the Bible, you have to be aware that this later time New Testament uses of the word Satan and devil are just going to be definitionally different than what you might read in the Old Testament. That was just my point.
Yeah, so we have in Judaism, my point was going forward. So in the last 2,000 years, Satan does play a part, and I'll give you just a few examples which you might find a little bizarre. Or maybe not, in light of what Jane just said. Satan comes up a lot around the high holy days, around preparation for what would be the parallel to Lent. In the Jewish tradition, the month of Elul before the Jewish New Year, which is not as much of a celebratory date as much as it's a day of being judged. We accept that we're being judged, and then the kind of chance to appeal the judgment in the 10 days from Yom Kippur from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur. And in that time, for instance, it's thought that Satan has more power in the heavenly court. And it's thought that there's a court going on. It's not somebody who's there to screw you. It's somebody who's there to say, like in the chapter, not so fast. These people, they're not so good as you think. And that's in this construct, which everybody understood was a construct, right? It's a psychological, educational kind of a construct. And so, for instance, we blow the shofar, the ram's horn, not only on Rosh Hashanah, on the New Year, but on the 30 days leading up to it. It's less known because it's more of a custom for people to go to synagogue every day in the morning service. And you blow it at the end, and the idea is to call people to repent, right? You call them you should know this is a special season. You can't be aware 12 months of the year all the time but now be careful. Now really change your behavior. But you don't blow the shofar on the eve of Rosh Hashanah. Why? Anybody know why? In order to screw with Satan, in order to get him mixed up. He's going to say, well, what happened? What, they're not doing it anymore, whatever. And then he'll forget about Rosh Hashanah, he'll forget about showing up in court. It's distracting Satan. That's like who thought of that? Right? Is that really the reason? Is that the real reason, or could it be maybe because they wanted to leave Rosh Hashanah to be special, so they're the day before? Maybe it's hard to know. Other examples of where Satan comes in, Levabel to Satan is this, things that you do, certain mannerisms that are influenced by Kabbalah, by late Jewish mysticism, 16th century onwards, that you do in a certain way so that you'll mix him up, so Satan won't have a hold, right? And there are demons as well. There are in the popular beliefs in Judaism, not only in whether it's European or whether it's from the lands of Islam, there's always been a belief, in still to this very day, in demons, and what you need to do to keep those demons at bay. But that's for another time.
I wanted to just add one more thing. In the Lord's Prayer, where we say, "Lead me not into temptation," which for many Christians feels like the dumbest line. Like, why in the world? What sort of good God would lead me into temptation? Because that's I don't want to do that. But again, that line from what I've studied, comes from that idea that God, that idea that God tempts us to find out how faithful we are. And it's a line of humility saying, God, don't even bring the tempter into my life to try and get me off course, because I'm not strong enough to do that. Like I'm not worthy. I'm not, my faith isn't big enough to like show people how good I am. Just keep me out of evil, So I just wanted to say that because I think a lot of Christians, when they get to that line of the Lord's Prayer, like, can I just skip over that one just to deliver me from evil? But that's where it comes from.
Well, actually, Jane, I was just reading George Lomsa about that, and it's a common Aramaic expression, when the husband went away, lead me not into hunger. So Christ was just using things of his time, colloquial expressions. And so I know that's always puzzled me and bothered me, but it was just a common speech. Lead me not this way. It didn't have anything to do with temptation and that. It's just the way they spoke.
Okay, Sid.
Yeah, I'm wondering how does all this talk about this come about with the Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara?
Okay, so what Sid is referring to is the evil inclination and the good inclination that's talked already about in the Talmud. It's not in the Torah. It's a Talmudic thing, and it's no. There we go. Sorry. And so it's very much present, and I think that's what I think, Jane. I think that's where it's coming from. That same area of religion in which nobody's perfect, and there are temptations in the world. And everybody has the power and it's an inner struggle. So what Sid is asking about is that, or what he's pointing out is that this inner struggle in the individual, though it wasn't called psychology at the time, the psychological truth that we know today is talked about in the rabbis. The rabbis of the Talmud also bring it up. They call it the yeast in the dough. The yeast in the dough, and I think the idea is that the yeast in the dough can be something really good, or it can spoil also. In other words, if it ferments to a certain extent, that's good, and you bake it in time, then it's bread that you like. But if you let it keep fermenting, then you've screwed everything up. I think that's.
There's also the at least it's like in the New Testament, yeast is oftentimes referred to as something from the Jewish perspective as evil. Because the unleavened bread is the holy bread. So when you put yeast in the bread, you're actually making it not holy. And that was the whole like confounding power of that parable about the kingdom of God is like the lady puts all this yeast in the dough and gets this nice big loaf. And we think, oh, that's so nice. That's what, but actually the hearers would have been like, that's insane. Like it's like the kingdom of God is full of stuff of unholy people. Mm-hmm. So again, I think I didn't mean to get us off track.
No, sure. Okay. So anybody's going to bake bread tonight, just Steve, maybe the last comment. Go ahead.
I just have a question. Is there hell in Judaism?
Yes, in Judaism there is, but it's not in the Hebrew Bible. So we're getting some noise from somebody here. Can't tell who it is. No, many would say that's part of that influence of that dualism that comes in from Greek culture, from Hellenistic culture. There is a netherworld, an under place where people go to after death. It's called Sheol, but it's not like hell in the way there's nothing active about it. It's a totally passive place. They just thought of that's where, because they bury the body or they put it in a cave, that's where the person is. And there's very little interaction. Every once in a while you get a story about interaction or a phrase of as if it's interaction where Jacob says, my soul went to Sheol because I lost my son Joseph, right? It says, or when Shaul goes to call upon the witch of Endor, if you know that story, to communicate with Samuel after his death. But it's not hell. But the hell that you're taught about, that some people taught about in Christianity, exists in a slightly different but a parallel. There's a parallel universe of hell in the Jewish tradition as well. Yeah.
Is there the devil in Sheol? Is the devil there?
No, so no, we don't have the devil who's separate from the Satan, but there are demons. There are shadim, and so I don't know. I'm not an expert. I don't think I've ever really delved into the literature that talks about the different versions of hell, and they exist already from the early first millennium. But I've never really gone into them, so I can't tell you. But I don't think so. I don't think that that's how it works. No. But you know what? Forget I said anything. I should simply say I don't know. Okay. So now we can't hear.
It brings to mind, off topic, but I'll just share it because it's one of my favorite episodes, this little episode of TV from Night Gallery. I don't know if anybody remembers Night Gallery with Rod Serling. And this was one of those, just like a little snippet one, not one of the bigger episodes, just a little snippet. I think it was John Aston, and he's playing like this playboy. He's like really groovy, and he's in his little Maserati, and he's driving up the one, like singing and smoking and drinking, just like being completely careless. And he runs off. You see him run off the road. Like he's like on the edge, like Big Sur. And there's a terrible crash, and then you see John Aston, like with bad like visual effects, going down, down, down. Like, hey man, what's going on? Hey man, and he lands in this like plop. This like looks like a lobby of a doctor's office, and there's like music and stuff, and it's just like real stark, like doctor's office furniture. And there's a door, and the door opens, and this little guy with a devil suit comes out, and he goes, "Hi there," and John Aston goes like, "Hey man, oh this sounds cool. I'm in hell. Like this is where all the chicks are, and this is all the good, like great. I can't wait." He's like, just wait here. So he shuts the door, and the guy sits down, and then this couple comes out, like pasty, kind of plump, older couple coming. "Hi, we're Harold and Helen Johnson from Columbus, Ohio, and we're here to show you some slides of our summer vacation." "Oh no, yeah, we're gonna do that." "Oh, now we don't. Yes, we're gonna show them right now." And then he just starts showing the first one. "Here we are packing for the." "Oh, that wasn't that." "Yes, we couldn't find the right clothes," and just like bickering with each other and showing, and John Aston is going like, "What? Get me out of here!" Like he's trying to go crazy at this like couple showing these really like endlessly boring slides. So he knocks on the door, and the devil opens up the door. He's like, "Please, I want to go to hell. I want to go where all the chicks are and the flames and all the action." And he's like, "This is where you're going to stay for all of eternity, because this is your hell, and this is their heaven." The end. So anyway, just a funny little reflection on the economy of the afterlife.
You'll find in textbooks for a lot of informal education in Jewish circles for teens. In the 80s, I floated around. I don't know what the source is, but that somebody died, one of the great rabbis or somebody died, and he was brought, and they offered him a choice because he was exactly on the, so he said, "Well, show me heaven first." Goes to heaven, and people are sitting around a table, and I'm messing it up. I'm sorry. They go to hell first, sitting around the table, and the table's filled with all this wonderful stuff, but everybody's sitting in their arms are stiff. They can't bend their arms. Have you heard this one, right? They can't bend their arms. So they can't get to the food because they can't bring it to their mouths, whatever. So they're all like knocking their arms around like this, and the food's spilling everywhere. And then they go up to heaven, and he sees the same thing. The people, their arms are like this, except for the difference is that they're using their arms that are stiff to feed the other person.
Yeah, that's a great parable.
I didn't tell that story very well, but Jane, I'm sure next time I'm going to ask you to tell it.
Well, you know what I'm going to do is I am going to, because it's all on YouTube. I'm going to send everybody that little parable. I'll send you the I'll send you the Night Gallery still scene, and I'll also send you a trailer for a Serious Man. So, in addition to all our great reading that we're going to have next week, there's going to be some fun viewing reminding us of this week.
Okay, everyone. Be well. Thanks for coming.
We'll see you next week. Thank you, Rabbi David.
Thanks, Pastor Jay.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.